5210. Every kid, every day. Let's have fun the healthy way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 servings of fruit and veggies are great to eat. 1, 2 hours of playtime or less on our screens is more than plenty. And let's go play outside. 1 hour! Tiger it, my turn to hide. 0 sugary drinks. Yeah, that's the healthy way to think. Every kid, every day. Let's have fun the healthy way. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fruit and veggies for everyone. 1, 2 hours or less on our screens. Look around, what's happening?
Hello everyone, I'm Miranda Strickland, the Clinical Coordinator for Keys for Healthy Kids. I'm really happy to welcome you to episode 12 of Project ECHO for Pediatric Obesity. Today's episode is entitled Taking a Bite Out of the AAP Clinical Practice Guidelines, One Nutrition Tip at a Time. If you're joining us live today, please introduce yourself briefly in the chat and include your name, email address, and whether or not you want CME credit. You can also use the chat box to ask questions throughout the session. Our objectives for today's session are, by the end of the session, participants will be able to recognize nutritional risk factors associated with childhood obesity, to develop nutrition strategies to assess and treat modifiable obesity risk factors, and to understand nutrition components of successful interventions, including reduction of sugary drinks, Choose My Plate, the Traffic Light Plan 5210, and others. Today we will be hearing from Dr. Amy Gannon. Amy has been a registered dietitian nutritionist for over 20 years. She has a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition and Foods, a master's degree in dietetics, and holds a Doctor of Education. She is the undergraduate program director and a professor in the Department of Dietetics at Marshall University. As a clinician, she began working with childhood overweight and obesity in 2006 and was a founding clinician of the Healthy Kids Weight Management Program with Dr. Jamie Jeffrey. Over her career, she has helped hundreds of children and families become healthier by adopting good nutrition and physical activity habits. She teaches medical nutrition therapy for the treatment of childhood weight management and comorbid conditions to graduate level dietetic interns at Marshall University and recently established a culinary medicine program also at Marshall. Through her work with Keys, she uses knowledge of culinary medicine to help children and families achieve a healthier lifestyle through cooking. Thank you, Amy, so much for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm very happy to be joining everybody today.
Amy, I was wondering if you could talk to us about how an evidence base is established in nutrition and dietetics.
Sure. So the reason I think this is important is because the latest clinical practice guidelines are based on evidence, and the authors of the guidelines looked at a lot of evidence from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, specifically our evidence analysis library. They did systematic reviews from the Cochrane database. They looked at USDA evidence-based guidelines. So I wanted to give that background to begin with, but I also think it's important when you're looking at what we eat because establishing evidence is difficult. First of all, evidence means more than just one study, right? Evidence means a meta-analysis. So you're looking at multiple studies with inclusion and exclusion criteria, and the meta-analysis basically analyzes the results, the cohorts, the groups, the variables of all of those studies. And so it picks out what really can be established as working and what maybe has just a correlation. I think that these clinical practice guidelines do a great job of using evidence to provide nutrition strategies and to look at risk factors for nutrition. But there are always going to be challenges with that simply because no one eats in a bubble, right? We eat whole nutrients, we eat whole foods. We don't just eat single things throughout the day. And when you're doing a clinical control trial with people and food, it's very difficult to have such stringent controls. So keep that in mind as we go through. A lot of what we're talking about is just good, plain common sense when it comes to nutrition.
Great. Yeah, I think too it's harder with children to get that evidence. You know, that's something that is more difficult. But so why do you think that this is important in the context of the new American Academy of Pediatric Clinical Practice Guidelines, which is, you know, what we're going to be discussing today?
Well, I think looking at the evidence helps us to determine how we need to be steering children and families and what we can hone on. So if you're a clinician working with a patient, you have very limited time with that patient typically, especially if you're not a dietitian or you don't have access to a dietitian. If you're a nurse working in a school system or a public health clinic, you probably don't have the background that a dietitian would have. And so I think these new clinical practice guidelines have already combed through that evidence, and they're telling you, we know this is what works, and here are some sound bites and some chunks of information that you can put into practice every day as simple things.
That's great. So that's one of the big reasons that I wanted to have you here today, because I wanted to talk about some specific nutrition strategies that providers could implement in their practice. Sure. So can we kind of dive into that, and you give us some tools so that we can manage our patients better?
Excellent. So the main strategies that the guidelines outlined as being evidence-based are MyPlate, the stoplight diet, 5-2-1-0, and then just a few others. So I'd like to start with Choose MyPlate. Probably everybody is familiar with Choose MyPlate. It's the latest USDA guidance in terms of planning healthy meals. It's been out for a number of years. It replaced the old Food Guide Pyramid and My Pyramid, which replaced the 4 food groups from many, many years ago. I like it because it's a plate. The clinical practice guidelines consider this to be evidence-based, as does the USDA. It's not perfect for everyone, and there are a few drawbacks that I want to point out, specifically with overweight and obese children and adolescents. But for the average person, it's an excellent way to plan healthy meals and also to understand what we should be eating day in and day out. So if we take a look, spend some time and take a look at what each one of the food groups suggests, just visually looking at the plate, you can see that what MyPlate is suggesting is to make half of your plate comprised by fruits and vegetables, right? And there's multiple reasons for that. Fiber being one of them, nutrient composition, looking at the antioxidants and the phytochemicals. These are the food groups, the fruits and vegetables, where you're going to get a powerhouse of nutrients. Many times children who are overweight are undernourished, and choosing more fruits and vegetables, making half of the plate fruits and vegetables, is really important. When we're talking about fruit specifically, we want kids to focus on fruit and not on juice. So juice, even if it's 100% juice, is 100% sugar. It might be 100% added sugar, but to your body, to your pancreas that's producing insulin, sugar is sugar is sugar. And so juice does not have fiber, which tends to cushion the release of blood glucose from the small intestine into the blood, right? So you have a big burst of sugar into the bloodstream during digestion of fruit juice, and then you're going to have an insulin response. For kids who are overweight and who are also insulin resistant, this is very problematic. You compare that to consuming whole fruit, a whole apple, a whole orange, whole grapes, as compared to the juice, you also have the fiber component. In terms of vegetables, the message of my pyramid, or of MyPlate, is really to vary your veggie routine. So what we want kids and adolescents to do is to choose lots of different color of vegetables. This is March, so I think of Eat the Rainbow. That was our theme of our Keys cooking class this month. And so literally, in your vegetables and your fruits, choose the rainbow. The more multicolored fruits and vegetables that you choose, the better it will be for your body. Specifically with vegetables, when you're working with an overweight population, you want to steer toward those that are non-starchy. So if we think about starchy vegetables, what does that mean? Potatoes, corn, peas. Some of the fall squash are starchy, some of the root vegetables are starchy. Those tend to be the ones, the potatoes, the corn, and the peas, that we steer toward in Appalachia. We like our whites, we like our yellows, we like our browns, right? And while there's certainly nothing wrong with those vegetables and they do contain a lot of nutrients, they're also going to contain more calories and more carbs. For a population that is overweight and insulin resistant, you want to look at the leafy greens. You want to look at the bright oranges and the bright reds. Not only do those contain more nutrients per ounce, more vitamins A, more vitamin C, but they're going to have more fiber and less carbs. 1/4 of the plate should be comprised of grains. And what the message is with MyPlate is to make half of the grains you eat in an entire day as a whole grain. So whole grains are comprised of the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. So when we're looking at that, you're going to have more fiber, you're going to have more nutrients, you're going to have more micronutrients like zinc, iron, more vitamins, the B vitamins, more omega-3 fatty acids. And you've probably heard me mention fiber several times, right? Yeah. So when you're looking at whole grains and you're looking at fruits and vegetables, what we're really getting at with blood glucose control is fiber. There are two types of fiber, insoluble fiber and soluble. Insoluble we think of as nature's broom. So when I work with kids, I describe it as nature's broom. Think of it as like sweeping out your intestines, going to keep your body regular, right? In terms of soluble fiber, that is the type of fiber that we're going to get from the flesh of an apple, the flesh of an orange. We're going to get that from whole grain oats, the inside of a bean. That forms a viscous-like substance in our intestines. It swells up, it collects sugars to prevent absorption through the GI tract, and it also helps to manage blood glucose levels. So insoluble fiber is more in the leaves and the skins of the plant, where soluble fiber is more on the inside of the plant. Whole grains are very important. They help to manage blood glucose and they have more fiber. In terms of protein on my plate, the message really should be choose lean proteins. Choose proteins, for example, ground beef that have a 90-10 or greater than 90-10. The big number on ground meats is going to be the lean number. The smaller number is going to be the fat content. Choose cuts of poultry that are skinless, like the breast or the thigh that does not have the skin. Choose ham, lean cuts of ham, lean cuts of pork tenderloin, and trim the fat from the edges. Fish is also an excellent type of protein to have. The American Heart Association recommends 8 ounces of fish in a week. So whether you're using shellfish or actual fish, fin fish with omega-3 fatty acids, or even canned tuna, all excellent sources of protein. Protein is very important to have at meals and snacks. I find that protein in the morning at breakfast helps kids to manage their appetite throughout the day. It helps you to keep from getting extremely hungry later in the day. It helps to keep concentration at school. If you just have cereal or you just have fruit in the morning, those are just carbs and you tend to burn through those very quickly. So that breakfast meal sets the stage for the day, and protein's important. In terms of dairy, we want to choose low-fat dairy products. So choosing 2%, 1%, which is even better, and lower fat dairy products. Cheese and yogurt are good sources of calcium, but are also great sources of protein.
So how can you tell everyone how they determine if it is a whole grain? So if we're at the grocery store, what do I need to look at to be able to tell if it's a whole grain?
So in order to tell if it's a whole grain, you want to look for those words 100% whole. So it should say on the front of the package 100% whole. So that could be in the form of brown rice, whole grain oats, whole grain wheat, or it might just say whole grain, which is a mixture of different grains. If you flip the package over and you look at the ingredients, the first ingredient should be whole grain. It won't say the word enriched. If you see the word enriched, you know that's a grain that has been refined, meaning the bran has been stripped off and the germ has been removed, which just leaves you with that starchy white endosperm center, which is basically white flour.
And I think it's great that you talked about the juice, because I think that's a big thing with parents. You know, they see that it's a fruit juice and they think that it's healthy. Right. And even, you know, I've had parents tell me, oh, it's 100% fruit juice. But you're right. I mean, it still has that it elevates your blood sugar. And so it's not good and not healthy, even though we think it is.
I've seen plenty of kids who have high triglycerides, high blood glucose, mostly just from what they drink, including fruit juice.
Right. And then I think something else that we need to think about, which you and I have talked about a lot, but you know, sometimes it's hard for people to get fresh. So if they cannot get fresh fruits and vegetables, it's just as good, you know, if you're not able to do that, to do canned or frozen. And I think frozen is better, right? Because it's...
Right. Well, typically with vegetables, frozen is as fresh and sometimes, or as good and sometimes even more good, better than frozen. I am tongue-tied. Frozen can be even better than fresh because it's really picked at the point of ripeness, and then it's just blanched and frozen. In terms of fruits tend to deteriorate a little bit when they're frozen, and so sometimes they will have a sugar coating put on them, so it's important to read those labels. I personally like to keep a wide variety of frozen vegetables on hand, so that way if my greens have gone bad or I haven't made it to the store, I'm still going to be able to do cupboard cooking and pull out veggies from my refrigerator and my freezer. And then you have just about anything you can imagine to choose from. In terms of canned is great if you're looking to reduce your sodium content. Just rinse your vegetables or choose a lower sodium version of that. And with fruit, you want to make sure that you're buying fruit that is canned in juice or water. Juice is a lot easier to find. Even in light syrup, you're going to have a significant amount of added sugars. And so that's something that you definitely want to avoid.
Okay, sounds great. So is there a MyPlate for chronic diseases? Do they have a specific
There
one?
is. So there's a MyPlate for diabetes. And we use it for kids who are insulin resistant. And MyPlate for insulin resistance and for diabetes has a little difference in the actual food groups. So what you'll notice is that 1/4 of the plate is a carbohydrate. So what they've done is combined that carbohydrate to include the grains and the fruits together. So that could be a starchy vegetable, it could be a grain, it could be a fruit. What it's getting at is to lower the overall carbohydrate of that meal. They've made 1/2 of that plate completely non-starchy vegetables. So you're getting lots of fiber, a big punch of nutrients, but you're not getting the extra carbs. 1/4 of that plate is protein, and 1/4 of that plate can be one of three things: a grain, a fruit, or a starchy vegetable. So you would not want to have, for example, a biscuit and a potato together, because that would be too many carbohydrates, right? So lots of fiber from the vegetables, but lower in carbohydrate for those folks.
Perfect. Are there other evidence-based strategies that you could go over?
Sure, there are several other evidence-based strategies. Another one that I really like is the stoplight diet. That's something that Dr. Jeffrey uses and you use in Healthy Kids. Dr. Jeffrey and I combed through a lot of literature when we started Healthy Kids many years ago. The stoplight diet has many different variations, but it can be called the traffic light eating plan. It can be called the stoplight diet. What you will see is that they all have one thing in common, and they organize foods into different categories based on the stoplight. So red, yellow, and green. Green foods typically mean go. They're free, for lack of a better term, and they're everything from non-starchy vegetables to calorie-free beverages, and on some plans they might even include lean proteins and fruits. The yellow is typically what you build your meals around. They want to say slow, make sure you're picking healthy choices, slow down, stop and think about this. Fruits, whole grains, low-fat dairy, lean proteins. And then the red group are usually the higher fat, higher sugary foods. So it might be sweet treats, it might be foods that are fried, foods that are higher in solid fats and added sugars. Dr. Jeffrey in Healthy Kids Clinic feels like that she has the most success when the green is limited to more starchy or to non-starchy vegetables, rather than expanding that to include the other food groups. So that is one thing that many plans differ from the evidence base. The evidence base in the original stoplight plan, which came out in the 1970s, actually only includes those non-starchy vegetables and the 0-calorie beverages in the green, and then all the other foods are fit in between the yellow and the red categories. So if you work with kids and you're going to use this, which kids respond, in my experience, to very well. They really respond to this well. It's not extremely limiting. It gives them choices. It helps them to know how many choices they can have. Make sure that you're paying attention to what's included in each one of those categories. And the last evidence-based thing I would like to talk about is 5-2-1-0. So obviously it seems like a lot of people from our poll know what that is. 5 should be 5 fruits and vegetables a day. If you look at the messages of MyPlate, it's really 5 to 9, depending on the age of the kids that are involved in that. So it could be anywhere from 5 to 9, but it's easy to say 5. Mm-hmm. 2 is 2 hours or less of screen time / media time in a day. And that's important because it gets to everything from lowered metabolic rate when kids are using a lot of media time, to seeing marketing of unhealthy foods, to mindless snacking. 1 hour is 1 hour of physical activity every single day. We find that the best physical activity for kids is just simple play, right? Mm-hmm. So kids don't necessarily have to be in a gym. They don't need to be lifting weights. Running around playing does cardiovascular and conditioning and strengthening. Helps your bones, helps your muscles. It does everything. And then 0 is 0 sugary drinks.
And why is it important to focus on the 0 sugary drinks?
So 0 sugary drinks was listed in the clinical practice guidelines as one of the major modifiable risk factors. And it was on my list of the very first thing to cover in terms of the risk factors. I think it's what I would call the low-hanging fruit. The zero sugary drinks are so important because they are associated with weight gain and many other diseases. What we're talking about are drinks that we used to just think of as maybe soda or fruit drinks. I hate to use brands, but think of like High C or Capri Sun. And mostly what, if not 100%, what the calories are derived from, and those are going to be added sugars. The sugar can come from sucrose, which is regular table sugar, but more often than not, it comes from high fructose corn syrup. I think that today, the plethora of sugary drinks that are available on the market have expanded way beyond just sugar, just beyond juices and soda. So we're looking at energy drinks, everything from Gatorade to Powerade. We're looking at coffees, frappuccinos, sweetened coffees. I see that in kids a lot. They want to stop and get what's essentially a milkshake that they consider to be a coffee. Tea, fruit drinks, fruit juices, energy drinks, the whole 9 yards. High fructose corn syrup is the typical culprit that's in sugary drinks. There can be other sources of sugar, but again, to your pancreas and your body, by large, sugar is sugar is sugar. The reason I think a high fructose corn syrup is so important to be watching for is because it's metabolized differently according to what many researchers think. If kids have comorbid conditions, especially fatty liver disease, high fructose corn syrup is a big no-no. It generates uric acid in a cell. It increases appetite, but it doesn't give satiety. It stimulates dopamine in the brain, so you have this constant wanting for more, but you never really feel full from it. It really goes into literature that says a calorie is not a calorie is not a calorie. In rat research, we think that it even causes leptin resistance. So high fructose corn syrup can really be a major problem, especially when kids are drinking more calories in a day, oftentimes than what they even need to eat.
Right. And I think something too with decreasing the sugar drinks, that's where they really can see some weight loss, and then it really encourages them to continue to make healthy changes. So
right.
That's, I think, probably, it's hard to do, but I think Dr. Jeffrey always says that's where you're going to notice the biggest difference if you focus on that.
Right.
So.
I think setting goals with kids around sugar sweetened beverages is one of the most important things that you can do in the beginning. If you're a clinician and you have limited time with a family, what I would say is search for what they're drinking. Look for those sources of sugary drinks and make some goals based around that for wherever that family is. Your ultimate goal really should be 0 sugar sweetened beverages in a day. You might have to do some work to get to that place. So what your goal, an example of a goal could be, would be replace sugary drinks with water. Replace sugary drinks with fruit infused water. You can have a fruit infuser pitcher where you're soaking pineapple, mango, any number. If you look online, there's a million different recipes for fruit infused water. Or you can do some kind of a powdered flavor that is sugar-free, but be careful because there is still some research saying that might still stimulate some appetite and some insulin. The research is very mixed on that. I think the main goal should be water and moving away from the sugary drinks.
And talking about goal setting, so I think something that we always talk about with goal setting that's really important is to have them make a goal, a positive goal. So focus, I'm going to drink more water, instead of saying, I'm not going to drink pop or soda, because that's, when you say that, then their focus is, I can't drink pop, and they're upset about that. But I think when we can word that differently and phrase it so that they're thinking more about the water, I think that's great. And then we do cooking classes together, Amy and I. And the kids we have fruit infused water for every cooking class. They love drinking it.
They ask for it.
Yeah, they do. They ask for it. So it's been really good.
It's also really important to emphasize milk, especially with meals. So drinking low-fat milk, consuming milk with meals is a really great way to get in good sources of calcium. If kids are lactose intolerant or they have a milk allergy, soy milk is really the only acceptable nutrient equivalent of cow's milk. So the nut-based milks, the cashew milk, the almond milk, rice milks, they are not nutritionally equivalent, mostly because they're totally lacking in protein. They might have a similar vitamin and mineral profile, but very much lacking in protein. So typically what I say is drink milk with meals, consume water for hydration, water after sports, Most kids don't need Gatorade. There are exceptions if they are older and they have salt stains on their cheeks or their clothes, they're playing for long periods of time in extended heat, then those are definitely exceptions. And I would say talk to your pediatrician or your dietitian one-on-one to figure out in that case. And then you can even buy a sugar-free version.
So what are your thoughts about Body Armor? Somebody had put that in the chat.
I am not super familiar with that particular brand. I've never purchased that brand, but I do know that most of those types of drinks, unless they have a sugar-free version, I think you just drink plain water. If you wanted to get a Body Armor because you wanted the electrolyte profile, you wanted the nutrient profile, I would say go with a sugar-free version of that. Again, I'm not super familiar with that. I would need to look at the ingredients to know. There are other brands that my kids ask for and that I'm a lot more familiar with. I do personally use an electrolyte replenishing powder, and I do buy the sugar-free version of it. I mix it in with 16 ounces of water, and I use that throughout the day for just some added electrolytes, and I use that after a heavy exercise. But by and large, I think water is the most important.
Okay. Yeah, she's saying that there's one made with coconut water. But yeah, I'm not really that familiar with Body Armor either.
I don't see a big benefit in coconut water, smart waters that have a different pH. I think a lot of that is marketing. A lot of those are gimmicks. I personally don't believe in the science that coconut water is the cure-all for everything. I have read the science in a lot of detail, so I personally don't typically gravitate toward those or recommend those.
Okay, good to know. So talking about the CPG, one thing that they came out with was that they wanted family-based interventions, and they were talking about nutrition and physical activity combined, going along with the 5210 theme. So why do you think family-based interventions are important?
Well, first of all, the family is really the centerpiece of kids. You would not want to start an intervention with a child and single out a child. That would be one of the worst things you could ever do. What I hear, the backlash that I hear from families is, why should I, quote, punish my one son or daughter who does not have a weight problem by making him or her eat healthfully just because the other child has a weight issue that they need to work on? And my response to that is eating healthfully is not a punishment. Everybody, whether your body is larger, you live in a larger body, or you live in a smaller body, everybody deserves to be nourished. So nourishment is not a punishment. Every person deserves to have nutrient-rich foods. And by that, I mean foods that are very high in nutrients and lower in calories from things like added sugars and solid fats. So families are very important because they provide support and they provide the groundwork for the hard work that has to be done when it comes to weight management and weight loss in kids. As kids are growing, they need good, healthy meals. And we know that when families eat together, they have a much healthier environment. Families also, when you look at families, you have to consider the home food environment. So just to kind of reiterate, the intervention really should include the entire family, not just one child. If we look at the importance of family meals specifically, I love this resource called thefamilydinnerproject.org. It has conversation starters, it has meal ideas, it has recipes, it provides an overview of family mealtime. It's an excellent resource for parents to read about all the benefits of family meals. I want to just touch on that a little bit. So, of course, families who cook together and dine together have better eating habits. That makes sense. If you're planning out your meals, you know exactly what goes into those. But you might not be aware that families who eat together have kids who have lower rates of depression. They have higher self-esteem. They have lower rates of substance abuse and teen pregnancy. They have better academic performance and greater resilience. These are, as a parent, these are things that we all want for our children. So family meals are not the cure-all for everything, but they certainly are very important. That resource, familydinnerproject.org, is a great way to start. If you're working as a clinician with somebody and you're thinking, how do I know how to do this? Ask the simple question, how often do you eat together as a family with the TV off or with your screens off? You know, for lower income families or maybe families who are in transition of moving, they might not have a kitchen table. And you know what? That's okay. That's where you start. You start from wherever the family is. If they have to sit together around the living room floor, That's okay. What you don't want are kids going into their bedroom, parents going into their bedroom with the screens on, sitting around the table or not if they don't have one, because we do run into that quite often. Being together, talking together, and preparing the meal and enjoying the meal together is what's really important. If dinner time doesn't work during a specific season, like right now, my kids are in 3 different activities. So it's pretty challenging. We end up having family meals together at 7 o'clock lots of nights, and then we head straight for the bath and bed. But if dinner isn't the meal that you can make work, it's okay to have a breakfast meal together. It's okay to do brunch or lunch on the weekends. Just finding a time and days during the week when that does work for your family is really important. And it doesn't have to be all or none. You know, you might make a goal of, we're gonna have a family meal together 4 nights out of the week. It doesn't have to be a big meal. It can even be soup and sandwiches. It can be a rotisserie chicken that you've grabbed from Kroger with a bagged salad on your way home. I think that is something that I also want to stress, because one of the other points that the practice guidelines go over are dining out and family meals. So when you plan out your meals and you have family meals, families are dining out less. Dining out is very expensive. Even fast food is expensive these days, right? So for my family to eat fast food in Chick-fil-A with 2 growing boys, for example, might be $50. And the cheaper fast foods are not far behind that, to be completely honest. If you can do things like crock pot meals, cook once, eat twice, which are things that we've been implementing in my family a lot recently, they can cut down on how often your family dines out, whether it's at a sit-down restaurant or in a fast food restaurant. Utilize convenience items, frozen vegetables, bagged salad, pre-grilled or canned chicken. On the way here, actually, I had all these big dinner plans, and then I thought, by the time I go home, I run to the grocery store for a few things, and I get to 4 different practices tonight. I'm not gonna have time to make that dinner. I personally am gonna utilize canned chicken tonight for some healthy wraps. So I have that in my cabinet. I would call that cupboard cooking. I have lots of veggies in my veggie drawer, and that's what's gonna be our dinner tonight. Also, develop some theme meals just to make it fun. Meatless Monday, Taco Tuesdays, Pizza Fridays, where maybe you make a homemade pizza and everybody can put on whatever they like. That makes family meal time a bit more fun. Planning it out and having your foods together as part of your home organization and your meal organization, and that makes things a lot less stressful.
Definitely does, yeah, because I feel like everybody's busy right now, and so I love how you talk about meeting them where they're at, because yeah, I mean, everybody's trying to do this, and it's hard. So I think if we can make it easy, and meal planning is a great way to do that. And well, I love what'd you say, once cooked, twice?
Cook once, eat twice.
Yes, that is great, because yeah, it's hard with everybody being busy. All right, so let's talk about some specific nutritional risk factors that the guidelines outlined. Can you go over some of those things?
So we already talked about sugary drinks. We talked about a bit about dining out, and we talked about family meals. So those are really important guideline or risk factors that the guidelines talked about. Another one is the presence of fast food restaurants. And so this really gets to how often do your children, especially adolescents, go out to eat at a fast food restaurant, not necessarily a sit-down restaurant, but also how many restaurants are available. So do you live in a food swamp, or do you live where there are more grocery stores? So adolescents tend to be the one that this impacts the most. They tend to want to gravitate toward their friends. You know, they're moving away from that centered family and they want to be with friends. So I think teaching teens about healthier options, if they are going to go out to eat, which let's face it, most teens are going to do that, especially if they're in sports or they have friends, right? Yeah. So teaching teens about healthier options, looking for grilled options, even if it's a grilled burger, skipping the cheese, looking for grilled chickens. If grilled chicken, maybe you skip the white bun, you might get a salad. If they're going to buy fries, teach them to get a smaller portion. Again, go to a 0 sugary drink. So it's just skipping the drink can save 400 calories depending on the size they have and how many times they go back for a refill. If they're going to a place where there's a bowl, a Mexican restaurant, a fast food type Mexican restaurant, you might have less rice in the bowl. You might fill it with more veggies. You might use grilled meats. You can try guacamole. You can try different salsas on the side. But then also with your patients, if that's the risk factor that you identify, set goals about how often families are going to eat out, how often teens are going to eat out, and then go from there. If their problem maybe is a large fry, then maybe your goal is I'll choose a small fry this week every time I go out to a restaurant. Or maybe it's I will replace a French fry with salad, or I'll skip the fries and get an extra serving of chicken. Or whatever it is, wherever you can meet that patient where they are. I think that's really important. Yeah. Another risk factor is snacking behavior. And there's definitely a positive association with obesity in ultra-processed foods. I'm not sure if you've heard the term ultra-processed foods, if you're familiar with that. It's a little newer in the vernacular of the nutrition landscape, but it's really things like extremely refined grains that might be put into a white-based cracker. It might be candies and chocolate, sugary drinks, bakery products like muffins and pastries. So typically they're refined grains and also very high in added sugars and fats. So what we really need to think about in terms of snacks, and this is what I tell my kids, what you want to do is fuel your body. Kids, if you're working with kids for weight management and you really want to use healthy language, you're talking about building a healthy body, right? And you can't have a healthy body if you're not fueling a healthy body. So having healthy snacks is a way to fuel a healthy body. If I go back to my plate, I use my plate for teaching people how to build healthy meals for just about everything. If I go back to my plate, what we're talking about with snacks are going to be 2 of the 5 food groups. So if you're choosing a fruit or a vegetable, you want to add a protein. If you're choosing a grain, adding a protein or a fruit or vegetable to that can be really important. I like putting a protein as one of the food groups for every snack because most kids and adolescents who are overweight are also insulin resistant. That protein helps to balance blood glucose. So a couple of examples might be fruit and cheese or fruit and nut butter. It could be carrots and string cheese. It could be grapes and a Greek yogurt. It could be cheese and whole grain toast. Just choosing whole foods that are nutrient rich, meaning lots of nutrients, fewer calories, is the way to go with healthy snacks. If you can get them to come from a whole food, if you can have them cut up, prepped and ready to go, make them just as convenient as reaching for the bag of processed crackers, that's going to make a big difference.
Do you want to talk a little bit about mindless eating and why we worry about that? Like, what is that? And
so mindless eating really is eating while you're busy, eating while your mind is somewhere else, eating in front of a screen, eating when you're worried, eating out of frustration. A lot of times what I see with kids is eating out of boredom. So I have this mantra that I say, when you're hungry, or when you reach for food, ask yourself, am I hungry or am I bored? If your kids are coming to you, or you're working with a family and the parent says, my kids want something to eat an hour after dinner. Okay, in reality, no one should be hungry an hour after dinner. So that could be 2 things. They didn't eat enough for dinner, or they're bored. Have a list of what to do when you're bored. That's one of my favorite things to do. When I worked with Dr. Jeffrey in clinic every week, I would ask the kids, what's your top 10 things that you like to do that really don't involve a screen? You can make a puzzle with little kids. You can play with Legos. You can play hopscotch. You can do all kinds of stuff. It doesn't have to involve a screen that gets you out of the cupboard, gets you out of the pantry, gets you out of the fridge. Because mindless eating oftentimes goes toward those ultra-processed foods because you're just kind of getting what's going to spike that insulin and get into that metabolic craving that you think you might be having. Typically, mindless eating is not for hunger. It's usually for many other reasons. If you're mindlessly eating when you're hungry, you're typically eating when you're working for your lunch or you're eating over your dinner hour. And that's still not a very healthy way to consume a meal. Sometimes it's a necessity for busy adults, but we really need to have a better food environment for kids.
Right. And I think with the screens, when they're eating and snacking while they're watching screens and they don't pay attention to how much they're eating is another thing. And so before you know it, the whole bag of chips is gone.
Right.
So
it's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, can we go into the case study now?
Yes, absolutely.
Amy's going to go over a case study, and so we're going to do that and ask some questions about that.
Okay, so I have a case study about Mark. Mark is a 16-year-old male who lives with his grandparents. During a recent visit to his pediatrician, His provider noted that his BMI was high at 32.8. So since we're working with Mark as an adolescent, we know we would have to plot his BMI on the BMI for age growth chart for the CDC.
And
so,
I should say Mark is a created name, right? Mark is not
right.
real.
Mark is not a right
providers.
Mark is not a real person.
Okay.
He might mimic a lot of people that I've seen, but he's definitely not a real person. So the 32.8 is greater than that 97th percentile on the BMI chart. So the provider asked for permission to discuss Mark's BMI and diet. His recent blood work revealed that his A1C is elevated at 5.9% and his triglycerides are high at 225. Questioning reveals that Mark's grandmother is concerned about his weight and his risk of diabetes. Mark is concerned about playing sports. He feels insecure about his weight and feels like he doesn't fit in with his peers. Further questioning shows that the provider discovered the following. Mark rarely gets exercise at school. He would like to start playing baseball for his team, his high school team, but he gets discouraged because he's unable to keep up with the others. He walks his dog for about 10 minutes a day after school, but spends the rest of his evening completing homework, eating dinner, and playing video games. When he eats breakfast, he often has a Pop-Tart. On the way to school, he often purchases a 16-ounce bottle of Mountain Dew. He usually chooses pizza at school for the pizza line, and he gets French fries. He also gets chocolate milk. He doesn't consume fruit besides apples and pears. His after-school snacks include sandwiches like bologna and cheese or peanut butter and jelly, chips, cookies, and another Mountain Dew. For dinner, his grandmother normally prepares meals like hamburgers with a bun, macaroni and cheese, and baked beans. He likes spaghetti and meatballs, fried chicken, mac and cheese, typical kind of adolescent kid foods. With dinner, he either drinks more Mountain Dew or a lemonade. He eats at bedtime, which includes donuts or a bowl of cereal like Captain Crunch and 2% milk. So it might sound outrageous to some of you providers, but I assure you it's not. It's very comparable with what we see.
Yes, definitely.
So what are some nutrition priorities for Mark and his grandmother? That would be my first question.
Love that. That's exactly what I was going to say. Eliminate the soft drink first. Yes, definitely, as we talked, sugar sweetened beverages, one of the biggest culprits for added calories.
So if you go back to that 5210, the soft drink, whether it's Mountain Dew or any other brand, is going to have a lot of added sugars and specifically from high fructose corn syrup. What we saw in this is that he's having Mountain Dew for breakfast, which is probably one of the worst. He's having it with dinner. He's having it after school at times. So not only is that a lot of high fructose corn syrup, but that's going to be a lot of caffeine going into a young developing body also. I'd also like to get a feel for a couple other nutrition priorities. So I think the sugary drinks, the soda, the pop, that's the low-hanging fruit. But what would be, once you were able to set a goal with that, to drink water instead of soda, replace soda with water X number of times a week, what would be a couple other nutrition priorities that you would consider? And again, you can come off your mic or you can use the chat box.
Somebody else said next the Pop-Tart.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
So I think the Pop-Tart is an excellent option. That would be considered one of those ultra processed foods because it does have refined grain. It has the sugary center of that. It may or may not have the frosting on the outside. Again, breakfast sets the stage for that metabolic activity for the whole day. What would be some things that would be healthier options to have instead of the Pop-Tart? Is that okay to ask?
Yeah, that's fine. I was going to say somebody else said incorporate more protein, whole grains, vegetables, and encourage more physical activity daily. Those are all great options.
Those are all great options, right?
Yes.
So let's go back to the Pop-Tart. What are some, I want to ask the audience through the chat or the microphone, what are some things that you might do to replace that Pop-Tart with breakfast? What are some healthier options for breakfast? Protein bar, that could be a great option, right? Mm-hmm. So make sure you're checking your added sugars, make sure you check your fiber, make sure you're checking your grams of protein in the protein bar. For breakfast, I like to think of 3 of the 5 food groups. So it can be a whole grain, it can be a protein, it can be a fruit. If you wanted to make a veggie omelet, it could even be vegetables. Some people have straight vegetables for their breakfast. So I do like the idea of a protein bar. I love the idea of hard-boiled eggs because they're grab and go. The school system several years ago implemented this concept of grab and go. And I think for my own teen, that's a concept that I use too. So I certainly don't grab and go with refined muffins or refined cereal things, but at the same time, things that you can take with you. So protein bars, protein shakes, or milk that's enhanced with a little extra protein and a flavoring, some whole grain cereal, some fruit, some peanut butter specifically because it has more protein than some of the other nut butters. Those are all great options for grab and goes.
Yeah. Other people said eggs, turkey, sausage, and Greek yogurt. I love all those ideas. Cheese
Right.
sticks are another good thing, right?
Cheese
for breakfast,
sticks are
'cause it's
excellent.
Easy. They can,
Right.
They can take it. On the
So
way.
an apple, a cheese stick, a hard-boiled egg would be a very filling and also a high-protein breakfast. If you have a teenager that maybe would be a bit more hungry than that, you could add a grain item also.
Great. Good job, guys.
Okay.
All right. Do you have any other questions?
I do. So how could Mark change his diet to become more in line with my plate? So let's think about his dinner meal specifically. With lunch and dinner, I like to plan for 4 of the 5 food groups for lunch and dinner. So if we were using my plate as a guide, how could we build a better dinner? What would be some examples? He likes macaroni and cheese, he likes hamburgers, he likes spaghetti with meatballs.
Anybody have any ideas? Love that. Adding vegetables, great idea. That's exactly what I was going to say. I tell people that a lot because, you know, with children with overweight or obesity, they're very picky eaters, so it's really hard to get them to eat vegetables. So a lot of times we'll tell them to put the vegetables in the sauce and disguise it, and you know, a lot of times the kids will not realize that they're even in there. So yeah, that's great. You can do that with spaghetti.
So switching the spaghetti to a whole grain pasta or a protein pasta, that's also a great idea. I would say some of the lentil-based pastas you should watch and read the labels because you're not really saving a whole lot of carbohydrates from those. The protein content may or may not be higher. So it's hard to make it a blanketed statement on that. I say go product by product and read the label to make sure that with the elevated carbohydrate you're getting compared to a whole grain pasta that you are getting additional protein. Another option I like for replacing that spaghetti noodle is a spaghetti squash. So you're really having far fewer carbohydrates with that. You can use the same topping. You can either use an oil-based, like a sauteed shrimp and vegetable, or you can use a tomato-based pasta. In our cooking class, one of the little girls asked me if we could have spaghetti next month. And so that's a bit of a problem because these kids are all insulin resistant and, you know, is it okay to show them how to make spaghetti? Of course it's okay, but what are the healthier ways that I can do that? So I've really been brainstorming it. And I think what we're going to do as an option is have some whole grain pasta available for tasting, but also have some baked spaghetti squash there available. And then I love to add green vegetables to pasta. So remove the starchy vegetables, no corn with the pasta, but let's add broccoli, let's add salad. If you have a picky eater, throw some cheese on your broccoli or make some sugar snap peas that are raw, make some cucumbers that are raw, some carrots. You can go any number of ways as long as you're adding a lot of vibrant color with that and having some source of protein. So the protein is going to be real important with that high carb meal. Even if you're using just 1/4 of your plate coming from grains, it's still going to be a big punch of carbohydrates. Whole grains, lower amount of carbohydrates, but also adding some protein.
Any comment about that? Somebody mentioned about the chickpea pasta.
So the chickpea pasta or the other lentil-based pastas I think are good, but that's what I was saying about you need to check label because it's hard to make a blanketed statement from brand to brand. Some are high in protein, some are lower in protein, some are higher in carbs than others. So what I do when I go to the store is I just really compare labels. Last spring, I think, or maybe 2 springs ago, we did a whole series of insulin resistance and we looked at different types of pastas that were wheat-based, but also chickpea-based and lentil-based and bean-based, and we just went from there to determine which one are healthier. And we found huge, wide variations in all of them.
Zoodles is a good thing too, right? Zucchini,
right.
So you can do
That's great.
Use the spiralizer and make zoodles. We actually did in our cooking class made a lasagna with zucchini.
Right.
Yeah,
And
so
it was very delicious, I have to say. The only thing about
kids loved
zucchini
it.
is it's a really watery vegetable, so I like salting it just a little bit, then absorbing some of that salt and moisture with a paper towel. But you will save a lot of carbs, you will get a lot more fiber, and you can make still a very delicious meal with that.
So somebody said thin sliced cabbage that is steamed makes a great spaghetti noodle alternative. It actually tastes pretty good.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I've
That's
never
something
had
that
that
I've never
before.
had. I'll have to try that. You know, most cultures do have some version of a cabbage roll. So some cultures use a grape leaf, some cultures use another green vegetable. So cabbage rolls, you know, they have that tomato sauce, or if you're laying them flat, that's a really great idea. I love that.
If anybody has any questions, you can, regarding anything that we discussed over this time, if you want to go ahead and put it in the chat, you can do that, and Amy will address it. So if you have any questions, not necessarily related to this case, but just in general, you can put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions about the case study?
I do. So how could Mark better meet the principles of 5210? So there's a lot of ways we could go with that. We haven't talked about physical activity yet, so maybe we could get to that one. We've talked about fruits and vegetables. We talked about sugary drinks. How could we get to the one of the 5210? So just as a reminder, he doesn't get much exercise at school. He would like to start playing baseball, but he's discouraged. And he does walk his dog for about 10 minutes a day. The rest of his time, he uses screen time, homework, dinner time. So if we were going to try and get more physical activity, what would be some goals that we could set to do that?
I love that. Family evening walk 2 to 3 times a week.
Excellent.
That's great. My family and I have actually been doing that. We've walked 3 days in a row, and that's good for us.
That's great. That's great,
yeah,
especially with the cold weather.
Yes, and you know, that's family bonding time, which is great. So it brings the family together, and everybody's getting exercise, which that's that family-based intervention that we're talking about. So that's a great idea.
Right. And also most dogs need more than a 10-minute walk a day. So if he's already doing 10 minutes a day, another goal might be add 10 more minutes to your walk, and then add. Did somebody say that
yes,
too?
You guys are great.
Excellent, very good. So just continually making goals. Also ask Mark what he really likes. Would his grandfather or grandmother go out and throw the baseball with him? Would there be another way that he could practice? Could he get conditioning in another way? Could he join the local Y? Could he work with somebody one-on-one? There's a lot of different options, but remember the ultimate goal would be 1 hour or more of physical activity every day of the week.
Do you have any other questions about Mark or anything else that you would like to discuss, Amy, since we have a few more minutes?
One other thing that I think I could discuss would be another nutritional risk factor, and I think it's especially poignant for where we are right now, and that is with food insecurity. So food insecurity was recognized as a major risk factor for childhood obesity. Kids living in households with food insecurity have been found to have overall higher BMI scores and greater waist circumference. And so a lot of that comes from more parental control over their eating more when they have food, and not looking forward to the days when they don't have food. So a lot of people view fast food as the cheapest option to eat, and so then they're spending their food dollar on fast food. And while there still are cheap options at fast food, I am a firm believer that even in a food insecure family, if you know how to plan meals, you can go to the grocery store and you could stretch your food dollar much further, even with fruits and vegetables, canned or frozen. Recognize ways that you can help families that are food insecure. Know off the top of your head pantries that have healthier options. The Department of Dietetics at Marshall runs our Marshall Food Pantry. It's open for all participants, whether you're a Marshall student or you're a member of the community. And we have only healthy items. So we have a smarter pantry.
Awesome. That's wonderful.
So look for smarter pantries.
Somebody asked, what are your best strategies for non-compliance or lack of motivation? That's a huge one.
So, Emily, my best strategies are to use motivational interviewing. So, there will be times when people are not motivated, and you use that scale of 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated are you to make this goal? Ask in the beginning for permission. Ask if it's okay to talk about weight, if it's okay to talk about the types of foods they're eating and how often. Ask the kids, say, you know yourself better, or the parent, you know your child better than me. What are the things that you want to work on? And before you make that goal with a child, ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to meet this goal? And if they say no, then you probably need to back up. Use your motivational interviewing to explore that ambivalence, to explore that resistance, and then find a goal that works for them.
Right. And I think you have to too understand that not everybody's going to be ready at that time. So if that person isn't ready, you make it clear that you're there when they are, so that they always know that they can come back to you. But I think that's something that as a provider, we feel like we have to make it better at that visit. And that isn't always the case. You know, sometimes they're not ready to make that change, but if you can say, you know, when you are, I'm here. So that way that keeps that door open for them when they are ready.
Molly Kellogg is a great resource for all people who are using motivational interviewing, but specifically for dietitians. She's done a lot of sessions that I've been at. I have one of her motivational interviewing books. I find her to be very helpful, but I've read lots of different motivational interviewing books and done lots of CMEs, and it has really changed my skills set as a provider.
That's good. Yeah, I'm actually planning on doing more project echoes about motivational interviewing, because I know that's something that is so important, and it doesn't always come naturally. You know, as providers, we're used to telling people what to do instead of exploring that ambivalence and letting them be in the driver's seat.
I think also at just asking for permission right off the bat when you walk into the room, if you're seeing an outpatient, is it okay if we talk about the types of foods you're eating and how often? And then, you know, if you recognize that some low-hanging fruit like the sugar sweetened beverages, you could say, you know, is it okay if we talk about how you might choose healthier beverages? What would that look like to you? If you were going to choose a healthier beverage, how might you go about doing that? If you were going to eat a family meal together twice a week, how might your family do that? Give them the option to come up with that idea and just see if that works for them. And really explore their ambivalence, because you know what? Like, you just can't take it personally. That's the thing. It's not personal against you. It's just difficult for them. And we've all faced similar situations to that.
Yeah. Something, the podcast that I told you guys about with, I'm blanking on her name. The AAP, those Conversations on Care podcast. I can't remember her name. But anyways, she was talking about that you should say to the patients why, one of the questions that she always asks is, why is what you are doing working for you?
Excellent.
And she was saying that because she said, you know, there was one family that they were eating fast food all the time because they had a young child that was constantly screaming, and so that was like the easiest thing to do was to go through the drive-through. So, you know, when you talk about that, then you can figure out, okay, well, what can we do to help you and to help it work so that you don't have to do what you're doing. So I think that goes along with that, exploring ambivalence. And then somebody had said balancing screen time when screens are at school, then for homework. So yeah, I think screen time is a big thing, you know, trying to find that balance because they are all day on their screens. So I think, you know, something that somebody had mentioned too is balancing. So you say, you know, for every 30 minutes of screen time, you have them do 15 minutes of physical activity, or, you know, something like that, so that you're doing both. They're getting both instead of just focusing on their screen.
Right.
But thank you so much, Amy. We are actually out of time, but I really appreciate you being here. It was a great conversation.
Happy to be here.
Thank you, everyone, for being on the call today.
5, 2, 1, 0. Every kid, every day. Let's have fun the healthy way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 servings of fruit and veggies are great to eat. 1, 2 hours of playtime or less on our screens is more than plenty. And let's go play outside. 1 hour! Tiger it, my turn to hide. 0 sugary drinks. Yeah, that's the healthy way to think. Every kid, every day. Let's have fun the healthy way. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fruit and veggies for everyone. 1, 2 hours or less on our screens. Look around, what's happening?